The air around Buckingham Palace hung thick with tension, the kind that often precedes a storm. Reporters had begun gathering outside the gates long before dawn, their lenses fixed on a building that had seen centuries of power, betrayal, and whispered secrets. But even among the many scandals that had shaken the British monarchy, few stories carried the emotional weight or the consequences of the one unfolding now. A single decision signed by the future king would alter not just the course of a family, but the very idea of what it meant to be royal. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Prince William, heir to the throne and the embodiment of duty, had reportedly done something that no royal in living memory had dared. With one stroke of his pen, he had approved the total removal of royal titles from his nephew and niece, Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, the children of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. The news spread like wildfire, each headline more shocking than the last. William strips Harry's children of royal titles. Archie and Lilibet erased from royal history. Royal blood, no longer royal. Inside the gilded halls, where portraits of kings and queens watched silently from ornate frames, the gravity of the act was undeniable. It wasn't merely administrative, it was symbolic. Titles in the House of Windsor are not just words before names. They're legacies, promises of identity, protection, and belonging. To lose one's title is to be written out of the script of history itself. Outside the palace walls, reactions were immediate and divided. To some, William's decision was a bold assertion of leadership, proof that he was ready to modernize the monarchy and restore discipline where emotion had once ruled. To others, it was a cold act of betrayal, an unnecessary punishment inflicted upon innocent children for the choices of their parents. How could a brother do this? One royal observer asked on live television. How could a future king erase his own bloodline? The story began, as so many royal dramas do, not in the grandeur of palaces but in the quiet conflict between tradition and rebellion. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped back from royal duties in 2020, they made history. Their departure, coined Megxit by tabloids, was seen by some as a rejection of centuries-old expectations, and by others as a necessary escape from an institution that had become suffocating. They spoke openly of their struggles, of the relentless press scrutiny, and of their desire to raise their children in peace. But in leaving the fold, they left behind more than titles and privileges. They left behind the shield of royal belonging. For years, speculation swirled about whether Archie and Lilibet would inherit titles of their own. Traditionally, such honors are granted automatically to the grandchildren of a monarch. When King Charles III ascended the throne, many assumed it was only a matter of time before Harry's children would be officially recognized as prince and princess. And for a brief moment they were. But that recognition, it seems, was fleeting. Now, in a decision reportedly approved by Prince William himself, that recognition has been revoked. According to palace insiders, William's reasoning was rooted in principle. Royal status must be earned, not inherited. It was a phrase that resonated with both admiration and outrage, depending on who repeated it. To his supporters, it signaled a shift toward accountability, a monarchy that values service over bloodline. To his critics, it was an act of arrogance, a move to consolidate power and diminish a branch of the family already cast into exile. Behind closed doors, the royal family was said to be in turmoil. King Charles, ever the diplomat, was torn between paternal affection and the preservation of the crown. Courtiers debated late into the night, weighing precedent against public perception. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan, thousands of miles away in California, were said to be devastated. It wasn't just about titles. It was about legacy, about how their children would be seen, and how history would remember them. But to truly understand the weight of this moment, one must understand the deep fissures that have long run beneath the polished surface of the royal family. The bond between William and Harry, once unbreakable, had fractured under the strain of duty, grief, and conflicting visions of the future. They were brothers shaped by tragedy, two boys who had walked behind their mother's coffin as the world watched. For years, they were united in loss, bound by the memory of Diana. Yet as they grew older, their paths diverged. One molded into the role of monarch, the other seeking a life beyond the crown's shadow. When Harry chose love over protocol, independence over tradition, the rupture became permanent. Their once private disagreements spilled into the public arena through interviews, memoirs, and relentless media coverage. Each revelation deepened the divide, and each silence was interpreted as disdain. Now, years later, this latest decision felt less like a royal decree and more like a final act in a personal feud. Still, beneath the public spectacle, there lingered a question that cut deeper than any headline. Was this justice or revenge? Was William acting as a future king seeking to protect the integrity of the institution, or as a brother still nursing old wounds? Those close to him insist the move was purely constitutional, not emotional. Yet those who have watched the brothers' relationship unravel over the years couldn't help but see the symbolism. The removal of Archie and Lilibet's titles wasn't just administrative, it was ancestral. It redrew the family tree. As news outlets across the globe dissected every angle, public opinion fractured. Supporters of Harry and Meghan accused the monarchy of cruelty and hypocrisy, arguing that children should never be collateral in adult conflicts. Traditionalists countered that William was doing what any responsible heir must, protecting the crown from being diluted by celebrity. Hashtags trended on both sides. Hashtag justice for Lilibet and hashtag protect the monarchy. In coffee shops, online forums, and radio talk shows, people argued not just about a family feud, but about the meaning of royalty itself in a changing world. The timing added to the drama. With the monarchy already facing scrutiny over transparency, modern relevance, and historical accountability, this move felt both daring and dangerous. For a generation increasingly skeptical of inherited privilege, William's decision might have seemed refreshing, proof that even royals must live by merit. Yet for millions who still romanticize the fairy tale image of princes and princesses, it felt like a heartbreak. As the story unfolded, commentators began connecting the dots. Some pointed to the king's health and the growing speculation about William's impending regency. Others hinted at the influence of palace advisors, eager to solidify a leaner, more efficient monarchy. There were even whispers that the decision had been months in the making, carefully timed to coincide with shifting public sentiment. In this narrative, William was not a rash brother, but a calculating leader shaping the future crown. And yet, despite the political explanations, the human element refused to be ignored. For Harry and Meghan, this wasn't just another headline, it was personal. They had built a new life in America, far from the rigid structure of royal life. But no amount of distance could erase the ties of blood. Their children, born into two worlds, would now be denied one of them. In Montecito, neighbors reportedly saw increased security and a flurry of visitors. A source close to the couple described a quiet sadness that hung over their home. Meghan, ever protective of her children, was said to be heartbroken but resolute. Harry, once the boy who longed for normalcy, now faced the painful irony that his pursuit of independence had cost his children their place in the only family he'd ever known. Back in London, William remained silent. The palace issued no formal comment, only a brief statement confirming an internal review of royal titles and designations. It was the kind of diplomatic phrasing that said everything and nothing at once. But within the corridors of power, insiders claimed the decision carried William's unmistakable imprint. For historians and royal watchers, this was a moment of reckoning. It wasn't the first time titles had been revoked in royal history, but rarely had it happened under such emotionally charged circumstances. This is more than policy, one royal historian remarked. It's a philosophical shift. William is redefining what it means to belong to the royal family. And that, perhaps, is the heart of the story, the tension between bloodline and merit, between history and change. The monarchy has survived wars, abdications, and scandals, but its greatest threat may come not from outside, but from within, from the decisions made by those who wear its crowns and carry its legacy. As the camera pans back from the palace, the narration slows, inviting the viewer to reflect. The gold spires gleam against the gray London sky, symbols of continuity and power. Yet beneath that beauty lies a question that will haunt both the monarchy and the world watching it. What happens when family and duty collide? When love becomes rebellion? When a title becomes a weapon? The screen fades to black, leaving a single line on the screen. One signature, 2 children, a royal legacy rewritten. The story of how it came to this moment cannot be told without revisiting the years of quiet tension that have simmered within the royal family. The British monarchy is a centuries-old institution built on symbols, and every title, every ceremony, every word spoken in public carries weight. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle decided to step back from royal duties, they were not merely walking away from a job. They were challenging a system that defines identity through hierarchy. That decision would ripple through the family, reaching its peak now with the stripping of titles from their children. In the months after Harry and Meghan left the United Kingdom, there was hope among some that the wounds could heal. The Queen had extended olive branches, subtle but significant gestures that suggested forgiveness and understanding. Yet beneath the surface, mistrust had taken root. Each new interview, each public statement, was scrutinized not for its content but for its intent. Were Harry and Meghan speaking their truth, or were they feeding the media narrative they had once claimed to despise? Were they exposing unfairness, or exploiting it? These questions, unanswered and uncomfortable, widened the divide between them and the institution that once defined their lives. Within the royal household, there was unease about how the Sussexes had reshaped their public identity. Their global projects, brand partnerships, and media appearances blurred the line between royal service and celebrity. What began as a quest for freedom evolved into a commercial venture, one that many traditionalists saw as a betrayal of royal values. The monarchy, long accustomed to control and protocol, could not easily reconcile itself with a couple that had turned its mystique into a marketable story. Behind closed doors, discussions grew increasingly tense. Advisors warned that allowing the Sussex children to retain their titles might blur the boundaries between the crown and private enterprise. Prince William, watching from his position as heir apparent, faced a dilemma that went beyond family loyalty. The monarchy he would one day lead was already under immense pressure to modernize without losing its dignity. Public opinion was shifting, especially among younger generations who questioned the relevance of hereditary privilege. William had long been aware that the future of the monarchy depended not just on tradition, but on perception. Every decision made in the present would shape the institution he would inherit. In that context, the matter of his brother's children became more than a family issue. It became a test of leadership. Sources close to the palace described William as deeply conflicted. His sense of duty clashed with his instincts as a brother. There was affection still, buried beneath the years of silence and misunderstanding. But there was also resentment over what he perceived as betrayal, and over the chaos that had followed each of Harry's public revelations. Some insiders say that William felt cornered, forced to act to preserve the integrity of the monarchy before it was eroded by spectacle. The decision to remove Archie and Lilibet's titles was not made lightly. It was, they claim, the product of countless meetings, consultations, and sleepless nights. And yet, when the time came, it was made decisively. The moment itself was striking in its simplicity. There was no grand announcement, no ceremony, no fanfare. Just a document, formal and understated, signed with the authority of the heir to the throne. Those who were present described an atmosphere of quiet gravity. No one spoke as William reviewed the final wording. The ink dried, and with it, the royal titles that had once belonged to Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana were officially rescinded. Within the palace, there was a sense that something irreversible had occurred. Outside those walls, the world reacted in waves of disbelief and emotion. In London, crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace, waiting for comment that never came. Across social media, debates erupted, some praising William's courage, others condemning his coldness. American networks framed it as an act of humiliation. British commentators framed it as the restoration of order. And through it all, the silence from both brothers spoke louder than any statement could. The wounds of their shared past were now laid bare for all to see, not through words, but through the fate of two children who had never chosen this life. For Harry and Meghan, the news struck like a thunderclap. They had long known their choices came with consequences, but even they were said to be stunned by the finality of this act. Friends of the couple described a mixture of disbelief and defiance. Meghan, always protective of her children, was said to have reacted first with anger, then with sorrow. Harry's response, according to one close confidant, was quieter, a mix of hurt and resignation. He knew this could happen one day, the source said. But that doesn't make it easier. It feels like a line has been crossed. In many ways, it was not just a political act but a deeply human one. A story of brothers who had once been united by loss and were now divided by power. The decision illuminated the unspoken truth of monarchy, that love and loyalty are often secondary to duty. For William, the choice might have been a step toward a leaner, more accountable institution. For Harry, it was a confirmation of his worst fears, that the family he once trusted would always choose the crown over kinship. And for the public, it became a mirror reflecting the contradictions of royalty itself. The narrative of royalty has always thrived on contrast, the balance between privilege and sacrifice, splendor and suffering. This new chapter added a modern dimension, the tension between family and identity in a world where tradition collides with personal freedom. Every generation of royals faces its reckoning, and this may well be theirs. The children at the center of it all, too young to understand the weight of titles, have become symbols of a broader cultural struggle. What does it mean to be born royal in a world that values merit over inheritance? How does one reconcile personal happiness with ancestral expectation? These questions lingered long after the headlines faded. As night fell over London, the palace remained illuminated, its windows glowing softly against the dark sky. Inside, life carried on as it always had, formal, measured, and bound by rules that few outside its walls could ever fully grasp. Yet beyond those gates, the sense of change was palpable. The monarchy had taken another step into uncharted territory, one where the line between public service and private life grows thinner with each passing year. Whether history will view this moment as an act of courage or cruelty remains to be seen. But one thing was certain. The story of Harry, Meghan, William, and their children had reached a turning point from which none of them could return. The introduction closes on the same note it began, with the image of a pen, a name, and a decision. A future king, faced with the burden of legacy, had chosen the path he believed was right for the institution he will one day rule. And in doing so, he had changed the course of his family forever. The camera lingers once more on the palace gates, where the reporters are still waiting, their breath visible in the cold night air. Somewhere inside, the silence of history deepens, waiting for the next word, the next act, the next reckoning. The story of the Sussexes' departure from royal life, often summarized by the word Megxit, did not begin as an act of rebellion. It began as a cry for balance, a search for peace in a world that offered none. In 2020, when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced they would step back from their royal duties, the news sent shockwaves through Britain and beyond. To many, the monarchy represented an unbreakable structure, timeless, immovable. The idea that one of its most beloved members, the son of Princess Diana, would voluntarily step away was almost unthinkable. Yet to those who had watched the tension build behind the polished smiles, it was the inevitable result of years of strain. In the months leading up to their departure, cracks had already begun to show. The British press had turned Meghan's every move into a headline, every gesture into an accusation. She was too modern, too outspoken, too American. Every attempt to carve out her own space was met with scrutiny that bordered on obsession. For Harry, who had watched his mother suffer under similar media intrusion, history was repeating itself in the cruelest way possible. He had once vowed never to let the woman he loved endure what Diana had. The decision to step back, then, was not a rejection of family, it was an act of protection. When the announcement came, it was delivered not through palace channels, but through social media. The Sussexes revealed they intended to become financially independent and divide their time between the United Kingdom and North America. Within hours, Buckingham Palace released a carefully worded response that hinted at both surprise and disapproval. Behind the scenes, courtiers scrambled to interpret what the decision meant for the institution. Could a royal truly be half in, half out? Could one serve the crown while profiting from celebrity? These were questions without precedent. In the weeks that followed, a series of tense meetings took place at Sandringham, the Queen's country estate. The so-called Sandringham Summit brought together the Queen, Prince Charles, Prince William, and Prince Harry to determine the terms of the couple's exit. By all accounts, the discussions were emotional. Harry was said to have spoken passionately about his desire for freedom. William reportedly expressed his disappointment and frustration, fearing that his brother's decision could weaken the monarchy. The Queen, ever the pragmatist, sought to preserve dignity on both sides. But even her wisdom could not heal the deepening rift. When the final arrangement was announced, the Sussexes were stripped of their HRH, Her Royal Highness, styles, and forbidden from representing the Queen in official capacity. They would no longer receive public funds, and their military and royal patronages would be redistributed. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely. For the palace, it was a necessary boundary. For the Sussexes, it was a painful price for independence. Still, they accepted it, believing it would bring peace. What they could not foresee was that this was only the beginning of a much longer conflict, one that would follow them across oceans and into the heart of their family's legacy. In the months that followed, Harry and Meghan settled into their new life in California. They launched a foundation, signed media deals, and began speaking openly about the challenges they faced as royals. Their 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey became a cultural flashpoint. For the first time, the couple spoke publicly about the lack of support they felt from the institution, the strain on their mental health, and the conversations about their son's skin color that had reportedly taken place before his birth. The revelations stunned audiences and damaged the monarchy's image abroad. Within Britain, the reaction was split. Some saw their honesty as bravery, others as betrayal. Meanwhile, within palace walls, the fallout was profound. The royal family, bound by its motto, "Never complain, never explain," found itself struggling to contain a global media storm. William, who had once been seen as the more reserved of the two brothers, was said to be privately furious. Not only had family matters been aired publicly, but the integrity of the monarchy itself had been questioned. The bond between the brothers, already fragile, was now broken entirely. What had begun as a difference in vision had become a matter of principle. For the British public, the narrative was emotionally charged. Many sympathized with Harry and Meghan's desire for a normal life, free from relentless intrusion. Others felt betrayed, seeing their actions as an abandonment of duty and heritage. The press, never one to resist drama, painted the saga in shades of heroism and villainy, changing roles depending on the audience. Yet beneath the noise, one truth remained. The Sussexes' departure marked a turning point in modern royal history. For the first time, a senior member of the family had publicly challenged the institution's inner workings and survived to tell the tale. The relationship between Harry and William never recovered. When the brothers reunited briefly at their grandfather Prince Philip's funeral in 2021, the world watched every glance, every gesture. The images told a story of distance that words could not bridge. Later that year, at the unveiling of a statue in honor of their mother, there were polite smiles and rehearsed civility, but the warmth that once defined their bond was gone. Those who had known them as children, inseparable, mischievous, protective of one another, spoke of their estrangement with sadness. Diana would be heartbroken, one family friend said. She always believed they'd face the world together. As the years passed, the differences between their lives became even more pronounced. William, deeply involved in royal duties, took on more responsibility as the future king. His public image solidified as the embodiment of stability and continuity. Harry, in contrast, became a symbol of defiance and reinvention. He spoke at mental health summits, appeared in documentaries, and authored a memoir that laid bare the private pain of royal life. Each new project widened the chasm. The monarchy, accustomed to unity, found itself divided not just by geography, but by ideology. Through it all, the question of Archie and Lilibet's titles remained unresolved. Under the 1917 letters patent issued by King George V, the grandchildren of a reigning monarch are entitled to royal titles. This meant that upon King Charles's accession in 2022, Harry's children automatically became eligible. For a time, it seemed that the family had reached a silent compromise. The children were listed on the royal website as Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, though the titles were used sparingly. It appeared that the crown, though distant, had extended an olive branch. But within palace corridors, doubts lingered. Some advisors argued that bestowing titles on children being raised abroad and outside royal duties could blur lines of accountability. The debate remained unresolved until now, when reports emerged that Prince William had formally approved the removal of those titles. It felt like the final act of a story years in the making. The brothers who once represented the future of the monarchy now stood on opposite sides of history. For William, it was a matter of principle. For Harry, it was a matter of family. For Meghan, it was a reminder that no matter how far they had come, they would never truly escape the institution they left behind. The world watched as the consequences of Megxit came full circle. What began as a quest for independence had ended in estrangement, not just for two brothers, but for their children. The echoes of that decision reached far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. They spoke to the enduring conflict between personal freedom and public duty, a conflict that has defined the royal family for generations. And as history turned another page, one truth became clear. The price of freedom in the House of Windsor is never paid just once. The decision itself was shrouded in secrecy. There was no official announcement, no public ceremony, no fanfare. It happened quietly, as most defining moments in royal history often do. Behind closed doors, in the stillness of a palace office where time seemed to stand still. The document was laid out on a desk, the language formal and deliberate, the tone unmistakably final. With one signature, Prince William had done what many in the royal household believed would never happen in his lifetime. The children of his younger brother, Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, were no longer royal. Insiders described the atmosphere in the palace that day as heavy, solemn. Aides moved quietly through the corridors, speaking in whispers. There were no smiles, no congratulations. It was not a moment of triumph, but one of reckoning. Those who witnessed the act understood its gravity. A family matter had become a constitutional one. The removal of the titles was not merely symbolic. It was structural. It redrew the map of succession, realigned expectations, and, most painfully, made official what had long been apparent. The fracture within the House of Windsor was now irreversible. At the heart of it was a statement attributed to William himself, one that spread rapidly through news outlets and royal commentators alike. Royal status must be earned, not inherited. It was a simple sentence, but it cut deep. To his supporters, it represented a new era of merit-based monarchy, one that placed service above entitlement. To his critics, it was a calculated strike, an assertion of power dressed as principle. The words reflected a man shaped by duty, burdened by expectation, and increasingly conscious of the weight of the crown he would one day wear. William's decision did not emerge in isolation. For months, discussions had been taking place among senior aides and constitutional advisors. The question of how to define working royal in the modern era had become urgent. The institution was shrinking by choice and necessity. Public trust, once taken for granted, now depended on transparency and accountability. The image of royals living lavishly without visible purpose no longer fit a society facing economic hardship and social transformation. In that context, titles were no longer just honors, they were responsibilities. To hold one without fulfilling its obligations risked undermining the very foundation of monarchy. Still, the personal dimension could not be ignored. William's relationship with his brother had deteriorated over years of tension, misunderstandings, and wounded pride. The two men had once shared everything: grief, laughter, purpose. Now, even their values seemed to exist on opposite poles. William's world was one of structure, discipline, and adherence to tradition. Harry's was built on autonomy and emotion. To some within the palace, this decision was not only about redefining the monarchy but reclaiming control over a narrative that had spun out of the crown's reach. Reports suggest that the final deliberations occurred during a series of private meetings between William and a small circle of senior advisors. The king, though informed, was said to have deferred the matter, granting William the authority to act in his capacity as Prince of Wales and future sovereign. Those present described the heir's demeanor as calm, deliberate, and resigned. He didn't take pleasure in it, one source recalled. He saw it as necessary, painful but necessary. The moment the pen touched paper, a new precedent was set. In a monarchy that has endured wars, abdications, and divorces, few acts have carried such quiet power. The removal of Archie and Lilibet's titles was both a message and a boundary, a declaration that the privileges of royalty would no longer extend automatically to those who live beyond its service. In practical terms, it changed little. The children were already growing up in America, far from the traditions of court life. But symbolically, it was seismic. It drew a line between those who serve and those who stand apart. Reactions within the royal household were mixed. Some applauded the decision as forward-thinking, an acknowledgement that the monarchy must evolve to survive. Others worried it was unnecessarily punitive, a move that would only deepen family wounds and fuel media speculation. "You can modernize without erasing," one aide reportedly remarked, expressing quiet unease. Yet, as always within the institution, dissent was confined to private conversation. Outwardly, the palace maintained its disciplined silence, issuing only a carefully worded statement acknowledging administrative updates regarding royal designations. Outside the palace, the world erupted. Newspapers splashed headlines across their front pages. William rewrites the royal line. Harry's children stripped of titles. A monarchy divided. Television anchors debated the ethics of the move, while online forums filled with outrage and applause in equal measure. In Britain, polls revealed a split nation, some viewing the decision as bold leadership, others as needless cruelty. Across the Atlantic, the American media framed it as vindictive, casting William as the enforcer of a system that had already rejected his brother and sister-in-law. The timing was no coincidence. The monarchy was entering a delicate phase. With King Charles's health increasingly scrutinized and public attention turning toward the next generation, William's every action carried amplified weight. His decisions were not just personal, they were historic rehearsals for his eventual reign. Advisors reportedly saw the title issue as a chance to assert authority, to demonstrate that William was capable of making difficult choices for the good of the institution, even at personal cost. "It's about legacy," one insider explained. "He's thinking not of today's headlines, but of the next 100 years. For many within royal circles, the justification was clear. If Harry and Meghan had chosen a life outside royal service, living independently, engaging in commercial ventures, and speaking freely, then it was logical that their children's royal titles should not remain. In the old system, birth was enough. In the new one, participation was required. Yet the human element of that logic was harder to accept. For all their adult choices, the Sussex children were innocent. The decision, fair or not, would shape how they were seen for generations. The emotional fallout was swift. Friends of the Sussexes reported that Harry was crushed. He had already endured years of public estrangement, but this cut to the core. His children, the link between his two worlds, had now been formally severed from the one he was born into. Meghan, ever protective, was reportedly livid but focused on shielding Archie and Lilibet from the noise. "She's determined they grow up loved, not defined by what's been taken from them," said a close acquaintance. In Montecito, the couple's mansion became a fortress of privacy once again. Paparazzi camped outside, waiting for reactions that never came. Inside, friends described long conversations and quiet reflection. "Harry knew this might come," one said, "but he hoped his brother would never take it this far." Their silence, however, spoke volumes. The public had grown used to the Sussexes responding to every slight with openness and candor. Their refusal to do so this time suggested a wound too deep to articulate. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, royal biographers and commentators scrambled to interpret the event. Some framed it as the logical evolution of a modern monarchy, one that must adapt to survive in an age of scrutiny. Others saw it as a personal vendetta cloaked in constitutional language. "William has drawn a new line," said one historian. "He's saying that being royal is not a birthright, it's a job. And if you walk away from the job, you walk away from the title." The statement resonated with the younger generation, many of whom viewed the monarchy's future as dependent on accountability. But it also alienated older supporters who cherished the romantic image of royal bloodlines and divine inheritance. In London, the press turned to the palace for comment. As expected, none came. Silence has long been the crown's greatest weapon, a reminder that while the world may debate, the monarchy endures. But within that silence, speculation thrived. Did William consult the king before acting? Was Queen Camilla involved? Did Prince George and Princess Charlotte, the next generation of heirs, understand the implications of what their uncle had done? Each question birthed another, feeding a narrative of secrecy and control that only deepened public fascination. Beneath the politics, however, lay a more profound truth. This decision was not just about who could call themselves prince or princess. It was about redefining what it means to belong. For centuries, the monarchy's power rested on bloodline. But in a world that increasingly values merit, even the oldest institution on earth cannot remain untouched. William's act may have been harsh, but it reflected the tension of a new age, a monarchy trying to survive by reinventing itself. As the ink dried on the document, a chapter closed. The family that once embodied unity now stood as a symbol of division. For William, it was an assertion of control. For Harry, a loss of legacy. For Meghan, proof that independence came at a price. And for Archie and Lilibet, an inheritance rewritten before they were old enough to understand it. The palace clock chimed in the distance as courtiers carried the signed document away for archiving. History, indifferent as always, recorded the moment in ink and silence. The weight of the past met the uncertainty of the future, and for the first time in decades, the monarchy itself seemed unsure of which would prevail. For Harry and Meghan, the blow struck deeper than headlines could capture. In California, far from the corridors of Buckingham Palace, the decision reverberated through their lives with a quiet, unrelenting ache. The news reached them not through a formal letter or personal phone call, but, as it so often did, through the press. One morning, their phones lit up with notifications. A reporter's tweet, a breaking banner, a familiar image of Prince William beneath a headline that seemed almost surreal. Prince William approves title removal for Archie and Lilibet. The world learned before they did. And in that moment, the distance between them and the royal family was no longer just geographical. It was generational, emotional, permanent. Those close to the couple described the silence that followed as deafening. Meghan sat in the kitchen, the morning light cutting through the California air, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she never drank. Harry paced. He read the headline twice, a friend later recounted, as if hoping he'd misread it. It wasn't that they hadn't anticipated something like this. They knew the monarchy rarely forgot, even less often forgave. But the finality of it, the cold precision of a document that erased their children's royal identities, hit harder than they'd imagined. They had built a life that seemed worlds away from royal formality. Their home in Montecito was warm, filled with laughter, color, and the kind of freedom Harry had never known growing up. The children ran barefoot through the garden, oblivious to the storm their names had caused. To them, titles were meaningless words, symbols of a world they had never seen. Yet, for their parents, those titles represented more than status. They were a connection to lineage, to history, to the grandmother Harry had adored and the mother he still mourned. When the titles were revoked, Meghan's first concern was for her children's future identity. She had spent years navigating what it meant to belong, to Britain, to America, to the crown, to herself. She understood, better than anyone, how the world could define you by labels beyond your control. Losing prince and princess was not about privilege. It was about narrative. How would the world see Archie and Lilibet now? As symbols of a broken legacy? as children born into a feud, as heirs to nothing but controversy. Harry's pain was different. His was the pain of memory. He thought of his mother, how she had fought to protect him and William from the cold machinery of royal duty, how she'd wanted them to grow up knowing life beyond the palace gates. Now he saw echoes of that same struggle in his own life, but this time he was the outsider looking in. The irony wasn't lost on him. In seeking to free his family from royal constraints, he had given up the very things that once protected them. Reports from those close to the couple spoke of sleepless nights and long walks through their garden. Meghan, ever the strategist, urged restraint. Harry, though furious, understood the futility of public retaliation. "He's tired," one friend said. "Tired of fighting ghosts." They decided to stay silent, to let the world interpret the decision as it would. But silence has a cost. In the vacuum of their absence, others filled the space with speculation and judgment. Some saw their silence as dignity. Others mistook it for defeat. Across the ocean, the palace carried on as if nothing had changed. Inside its marble halls, the daily rhythm of tradition continued: tea at 4, meetings at 5, rehearsed smiles for the press. Yet even there, the decision cast long shadows. Courtiers whispered about the implications. Some wondered whether William's choice would set a precedent that could one day affect other family members. Others worried that the emotional fallout could reignite public sympathy for the Sussexes, undoing the monarchy's carefully managed narrative. But beyond politics and protocol, the question lingered: what did this mean for the children? For Archie and Lilibet, life would continue much as before. Playdates, bedtime stories, family outings. Yet the invisible weight of expectation would follow them. They were Windsor by blood but not by title, part of a dynasty that had disowned them in all but name. As they grew older, they would come to understand the meaning of what had been taken away. Not the words themselves, but the legacy behind them. Public opinion mirrored the division within the family. In Britain, traditionalists praised the decision as necessary. "You cannot have it both ways," one editorial declared. "You cannot profit from royal fame while rejecting royal duty." Others saw cruelty in the act, arguing that punishing children for the choices of their parents betrayed the very values the monarchy claimed to uphold. "This isn't modernization," a columnist wrote. "It's retribution." In America, where the Sussexes had become symbols of independence and reinvention, the story played differently. Television pundits framed it as an act of vindictiveness, a sign that the institution was threatened by Harry and Meghan's growing global influence. Talk shows debated whether the royal family had gone too far. Even celebrities weighed in, posting messages of support and solidarity online. Once again, the Sussexes had become the center of an international conversation, one they hadn't asked for but couldn't escape. King Charles's role in the decision remained ambiguous. Officially, the palace stated that title decisions were a matter for the crown, implying his involvement. Yet insiders hinted that the king had kept a deliberate distance, allowing his son to take the lead. "He didn't stop it," one insider said, "but he didn't drive it either." Charles, ever cautious, understood that intervening might worsen perceptions of favoritism. But his silence was interpreted in many ways. By some as approval, by others as abandonment. Behind the scenes, sources suggested that William had briefed his father only after the decision was finalized. The king was informed, not consulted, one royal aide confided. It was a subtle distinction, but a telling one. It underscored how power within the monarchy was gradually shifting, how William, though not yet king, was beginning to exercise influence on matters that once would have required his father's approval. The act of removing his niece and nephew's titles was not only a statement about family, it was a rehearsal for sovereignty. Among the British public, reactions evolved from shock to debate. Opinion polls revealed generational divides. Older Britons largely supported William's decision, while younger ones viewed it as unnecessary and cold. Some saw it as a turning point for the monarchy, a moment when the old guard gave way to a leaner, more merit-driven institution. Others saw it as proof that the monarchy could never escape its own contradictions, claiming modernity while enforcing archaic hierarchies. For Harry, the decision reopened old wounds. In private, He confided to friends that he felt cut off from history. His children, he believed, had been made symbols in a game of power. They were never supposed to be pawns, he reportedly said. His frustration, however, was tempered by a growing sense of clarity. In his memoir, he had written that freedom came with loss. Now he was living that truth fully. Without titles, his family was no longer bound by the monarchy's expectations, but neither were they shielded by its protection. Meghan, for her part, turned inward. She focused on her children, her projects, and her advocacy work. She refused to allow the decision to define her family's identity. "Titles don't make you royal," she told a friend. "Character does." It was the kind of statement that resonated beyond the palace walls, echoing in conversations about privilege, race, and tradition across the world. To her supporters, it was grace under fire. To her detractors, it was defiance. Meanwhile, public curiosity intensified. Paparazzi staked out the Sussex residence. Documentaries were commissioned. Royal analysts filled talk shows with theories about whether reconciliation was still possible. But those closest to the situation knew the truth. Reconciliation would require trust, and trust had long since been broken. As the weeks passed, the noise faded but the impact lingered. The monarchy had made its point. The Sussexes had made theirs. Yet somewhere in the middle, between the crown and California, between blood and belonging, two small children had lost something intangible, a connection to a story larger than themselves. The world moved on, as it always does. New headlines replaced the old. The palace continued its rhythm of ceremonies and appearances. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had changed. The royal family had once prided itself on continuity, on the unbroken line that stretched back centuries. Now that line had a visible fracture. The future king had made his choice, and the echoes of it would carry through generations. In the end, it was not the loss of titles that defined the moment, but what it revealed. The monarchy, for all its grandeur and ceremony, was still a family, flawed, divided, human. And like any family, its greatest battles were not fought in public but in silence, through decisions that reshaped lives long after the signatures dried. Archie and Lilibet would grow up far from the palace that defined their heritage, their parents determined to give them what Harry had always longed for: freedom. Yet the paradox remained. In freeing them from royal obligation, William had bound them forever to its history. To understand the magnitude of what Prince William's decision represents, one must look backward, through centuries of royal history, to the moments when power, privilege, and lineage collided in ways that forever changed the monarchy. The story of Archie and Lilibet's titles is not the first time members of the royal family have been stripped of recognition, nor will it likely be the last. The British monarchy has always been an evolving institution, balancing its sacred traditions with the shifting tides of modern expectation. Yet in every era, moments of loss, of title, of honor, of belonging, have marked turning points that reveal more about the institution's soul than its ceremonies ever could. In the early 20th century, King George V issued the 1917 Letters Patent, a decree that defined who could hold the title of prince or princess. It was an effort to streamline the monarchy during a time of global upheaval, when the British Empire was shrinking and the world was reshaping itself after the First World War. Before then, royal titles were bestowed more liberally, often extending deep into the family tree. But George V, keen to preserve dignity and reduce cost, restricted the use of Royal Highness to the monarch's children, grandchildren through the male line, and the eldest son of the Prince of Wales. It was a practical move, but one that reflected a recurring theme in royal history: the tightening of control whenever the crown feels threatened. Over the decades, that balance of inclusion and exclusion would play out again and again. When King Edward VIII abdicated the throne in 1936 to Mary Wallis Simpson, he forfeited not only his reign but also the right for his wife to share his royal title. The crown could forgive his love, perhaps, but not his defiance. His new title, Duke of Windsor, was a reminder of both privilege and punishment, a symbol of exile within nobility. He was family yet apart. It was a pattern the monarchy would repeat with each act of rebellion. The mid-20th century brought new challenges as the institution struggled to define its place in a changing world. Titles became tools of diplomacy and discipline. Princess Margaret, the Queen's sister, was denied permission to marry Peter Townsend, a divorced man, because the union was seen as inconsistent with royal duty. The decision cost her happiness but preserved the monarchy's moral image. Years later, her children were raised without royal titles, a conscious choice to offer them normalcy, but also a subtle signal that even those born close to the throne could be distanced from it when necessary. By the time of Queen Elizabeth II's long reign, the monarchy had become more self-aware. It no longer ruled by decree, but by example. Yet even she made decisions that reflected the constant tension between love and legacy. When Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson divorced, their daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, retained their titles, but their public roles were minimized. When Prince Edward's children were born, he and his wife chose to forego the titles of prince and princess for them altogether. They will grow up as children of an earl, the statement read, a sign that even within the royal family, the definition of royalty was shifting. Seen in that light, Prince William's decision fits into a long pattern of adjustment. Each generation reshapes the monarchy in its own image, pruning branches of the family tree to reflect new realities. But what makes this case different is its emotional resonance. Archie and Lilibet were not distant cousins or fringe royals. They are the grandchildren of a reigning monarch, the children of a man who was once second in line to the throne. To remove their titles is to reach into the core of the dynasty itself, to alter not its edges but its center. This moment also reflects a deeper philosophical shift. For centuries, the monarchy has been defined by inheritance, by the belief that birth alone confers legitimacy. Now, under William's influence, the message seems to be that royalty is not a birthright but a vocation. Royal status must be earned, he said, and with that, he challenged one of the institution's oldest assumptions. It is a radical notion disguised as tradition, one that mirrors the changing expectations of the public. In a world where leadership is measured by transparency and merit, even the crown must justify its place. Comparisons have been drawn to other monarchies around the world, many of which have faced similar questions. In Sweden, King Carl XVI Gustav made headlines in 2019 when he removed royal status from several of his grandchildren, citing the need to reduce the number of working royals. The move was largely praised for its practicality. In Spain, King Felipe VI stripped his sister's husband of the Duke of Palma title after a corruption scandal, signaling zero tolerance for impropriety. Even Japan, bound by centuries of custom, has seen members of its imperial family lose their royal status upon marrying commoners. The message in all these cases was clear. Monarchy survives not by expansion, but by refinement. Yet the British crown occupies a unique position. Its global visibility magnifies every act, every word, every omission. When William approved the removal of Archie and Lilibet's titles, it wasn't just an internal adjustment. It was a cultural event. The decision touched on questions far beyond royal protocol. Identity, race, inclusion, and the definition of heritage in a post-colonial age. These children were not only descendants of Britain's most famous family, they were symbols of its potential to evolve. Their existence represented a bridge between worlds, between tradition and change, between the old empire and a more diverse modern Britain. To some, the loss of their titles was a missed opportunity, a chance for the monarchy to prove that it could embrace the future rather than retreat from it. Imagine what it would mean for the image of the monarchy, one commentator observed, to have a prince and princess who embody the diversity of the modern Commonwealth. Instead, the narrative that emerged was one of exclusion, reinforcing the perception of a monarchy unable to adapt beyond its inherited identity. Still, within the walls of the institution, the calculus was different. Advisors and historians argued that the monarchy's strength lay precisely in its boundaries. If everyone is royal, no one is, one aide was quoted as saying. The argument held that preserving the sanctity of titles required drawing lines, even painful ones. In that view, William's act was not an attack on his brother's family, but a defense of the monarchy's future. by ensuring that only those who serve the crown carry its honors. He was safeguarding its integrity in an era when celebrity and monarchy increasingly overlap. This logic aligns with William's vision of a streamlined royal family, one that mirrors the Scandinavian model. Fewer working members, clearer roles, greater accountability. He has often spoken of his desire to modernize the institution without dismantling its core traditions. The decision regarding Archie and Lilibet can thus be seen as part of a broader strategy, to define the monarchy not by birth, but by purpose. Yet history has shown that such efforts rarely come without consequence. Every act of reduction carries emotional and symbolic weight. When Edward VIII abdicated, his decision haunted the family for decades. When Princess Margaret's love was denied, it shaped public perceptions of the monarchy's humanity. And now, as titles are stripped from two young children, the monarchy faces another test: whether it can evolve without appearing to betray its own blood. Royal historians have begun to frame William's move as part of a cycle, a necessary correction in a lineage that oscillates between excess and austerity. The British monarchy contracts and expands like a living organism, one scholar wrote. Each generation prunes it, and in doing so, reveals what it values most. For Queen Victoria, it was empire. For George V, it was efficiency. For Elizabeth II, it was duty. For William, it appears to be accountability. But accountability comes at a cost. While the decision may strengthen the institution's image in the eyes of some, it risks deepening the perception that the monarchy is a family divided against itself. The Windsor legacy has always depended on unity, the image of a family that embodies the nation's continuity. Each public fracture chips away at that illusion. The removal of Archie and Lilibet's titles is more than a bureaucratic adjustment. It is a metaphor for the monarchy's struggle to define itself in the 21st century. Beyond Britain, the decision has ignited conversations about monarchy itself, its relevance, its morality, its future. In Commonwealth nations where Republican movements are gaining momentum, critics cite the decision as proof of an outdated system clinging to privilege and hierarchy. If the monarchy can erase its own descendants for convenience, one commentator from Australia argued, what loyalty can it expect from the rest of us? The symbolic weight of the act reaches far beyond the palace gates, touching the very idea of monarchy as a moral institution. In the weeks following William's decision, a wave of analysis and speculation swept across media outlets, think tanks, and royal commentary circles. Experts lined up to interpret what the move meant for the monarchy, for the brothers, and for the institution's future. It was no longer just a family issue. It had become a national conversation about power, legacy, and the moral authority of the crown. To many observers, the act of removing Archie and Lilibet's titles was less a punishment and more a manifesto, a declaration of what kind of monarchy Prince William intended to lead when his time came. Royal analysts on television and in newspapers tried to decode the subtext behind the decision. One commentator described it as a watershed moment in royal modernity, a necessary step to draw a line between the working royals and the independent ones. Another expert called it a dangerous gamble, warning that alienating Harry and Meghan's family could permanently fracture the Windsor legacy. Across Britain, the conversation shifted from gossip to governance. What did it truly mean to earn a royal title, and who decided what counted as service? Several constitutional historians drew parallels between William's Act and other transformative periods in British royal history. This is not about personal animosity, one professor told the BBC. It's about redefining what the monarchy represents in the 21st century. The public no longer tolerates privilege without purpose. The heir to the throne understands that, and he's adapting before he ascends. The words echoed a sentiment increasingly common among younger Britons: respect for tradition, but only if it could evolve with the times. However, not everyone agreed that modernization was the true motive. Some experts believed the decision was deeply personal. William has always viewed loyalty as the currency of monarchy, a royal biographer noted. When Harry stepped away, he didn't just reject duty. He rejected the bond that underpins the entire system. William sees that as a betrayal. The removal of the children's titles may be political on paper, but emotionally, It's a way of drawing a boundary. It's saying, this is my family and this is not. This intersection between duty and emotion fascinated political commentators as well. In the House of Commons, a few MPs even debated whether the monarchy should continue to hold the power to bestow or revoke titles without parliamentary oversight. Some argued that such decisions, though symbolic, had public implications. Others dismissed the notion, calling it an internal family matter that did not warrant political interference. Still, the fact that it reached the floor of Parliament at all spoke volumes about the story's reach. The monarchy, once untouchable, was now part of a broader national discourse about fairness, accountability, and equality. Beyond politics, social scientists weighed in on what the controversy revealed about Britain's relationship with the royal family. Public fascination with the monarchy has always been a paradox, an institution both loved and resented, revered and questioned. The stripping of titles brought those contradictions into sharp focus. Sociologists pointed out that while many people admired William's decisive leadership, others saw it as proof that the monarchy still operated on outdated hierarchies. It's a reminder, one expert wrote, that the crown's modern image is built on ancient rules. Every attempt to modernize only exposes how deeply traditional it remains. Meanwhile, the media played its familiar role, amplifying the tension, shaping perception, and blurring the line between fact and drama. Newspapers ran front-page spreads comparing photographs of William and Harry, analyzing their expressions as if they were chess players mid-match. Talk shows devoted entire episodes to the family feud, featuring psychologists dissecting body language and former palace staff revealing anecdotes. The digital age had turned royal watching into a global industry. Every comment, every headline, every leaked source became part of a sprawling narrative that no one could fully control. For the monarchy, media management became a strategic priority. Courtiers quietly began coordinating briefings to reframe the story as an act of modernization rather than retribution. Friendly columnists were encouraged to emphasize William's sense of duty and long-term vision for a streamlined royal household. Photographs of the Prince and Princess of Wales with their children were circulated to remind the public of continuity and stability. It was a campaign of subtle reassurance, a reminder that while one branch of the family was fading from the royal picture, another stood ready to inherit the future. Financial analysts also weighed in, highlighting how the Sussexes' independence had blurred lines between public duty and private enterprise. Their lucrative media deals, podcasts, and production partnerships had turned their name into a global brand, raising uncomfortable questions about the intersection of monarchy and money. If royal titles are used to generate profit, it undermines the credibility of the institution, one commentator wrote. William's decision to revoke those titles is as much about protecting the royal brand as it is about family politics. At the same time, there were voices warning that the monarchy's reputation could suffer if it appeared vindictive. Public sympathy for Harry and Meghan, though fluctuating, remained significant, especially in the United States. Opinion polls showed that while most Britons supported William's leadership, many also felt compassion for Harry's children. This could easily be perceived as punishing innocence, one public relations expert said. The crown must tread carefully. Strength without empathy can look like cruelty. Behind these analyses lay a broader question. What is the role of monarchy in a world defined by meritocracy? Political philosophers and journalists alike noted the irony of an institution built on birthright now preaching the value of earned status. Royalty is, by definition, inherited, one columnist mused. To argue that it must be earned is to challenge its very foundation. But supporters of William's stance countered that this was precisely the point. The monarchy's survival depended on redefining what it meant to be royal, not by blood alone but by service. Beyond Britain, the global response was equally divided. In Canada and Australia, where Republican movements have gained traction, the event was seen as another reminder of how out of step the monarchy can appear. In contrast, some European commentators praised William's pragmatism, noting that Scandinavian monarchies had long taken similar steps to limit royal entitlements. The international press, as always, turned the family drama into a morality tale, a story about power, pride, and the eternal struggle between tradition and change. Meanwhile, scholars of media ethics pointed out how the coverage itself perpetuated the monarchy's paradox. The royal family exists in a feedback loop, one media professor explained. They need publicity to remain relevant, yet that same publicity exposes their flaws. The Sussexes tried to escape it and became even more famous. William tried to contain it and made it worse. In a digital age, the monarchy can no longer control its own story, it can only react to it. Economic experts added yet another layer, analyzing how the monarchy's public funding might be affected by its shrinking structure. Some suggested that William's decision could strengthen arguments for maintaining the institution, as it demonstrated fiscal responsibility. Others argued the opposite, that fewer royals meant less visibility and therefore less justification for taxpayer support. The monarchy's value, they reminded the public, had always been both tangible and symbolic. Cultural critics, meanwhile, focused on the human element. The royal family, they argued, was no longer just an institution. It was a narrative, a living drama that reflected Britain's identity and contradictions. In that sense, the title removal was more than a political maneuver. It was a reflection of a nation negotiating its relationship with its past. Every generation rewrites the monarchy, a historian wrote in The Guardian. What we're witnessing now is not its decline, but its transformation into something more self-aware, less mythical, and perhaps more honest. Amid all these interpretations, one truth stood out. The decision had changed the tone of the monarchy's story. It was no longer about fairy tale imagery or inherited grandeur. It was about accountability, adaptation, and the painful choices required to survive in a skeptical age. For William, this was leadership in practice, uncomfortable, controversial, but necessary. For Harry and Meghan, it was another chapter in a saga they had tried to escape but could never fully leave behind. In the end, experts could debate the politics, historians could trace the precedents, and journalists could write endless headlines. But the significance of this moment lay not in analysis, but in emotion. The monarchy's strength has always rested on its ability to embody continuity through change, to remain human while appearing timeless. William's act tested that balance. It was a reminder that behind every crown lies a family, and behind every decision lies a story of hearts divided by duty. As the dust began to settle, what remained was not just a family fractured, but an institution subtly altered. The monarchy, once a symbol of unwavering continuity, now stood at a crossroads, its traditions colliding with the demands of a modern world. The story of Archie and Lilibet's lost titles had grown into something far larger than itself. It had become a mirror held up to Britain, reflecting both its reverence for the past and its unease with change. It had become a conversation about what it truly means to belong to history. In the weeks following the revelation, the public's attention began to drift toward other matters. New headlines, fresh controversies. But the reverberations of William's decision did not fade. They lingered in quiet discussions, in columns tucked deep within newspapers, and in the thoughtful pauses of commentators who realized they had witnessed more than scandal. They had witnessed evolution. Royal observers began to describe the moment not as an end, but as a transition, a symbolic shift from inherited grandeur to earned legitimacy. It was a choice that redefined what the monarchy could be, more disciplined, perhaps more respected, but also more divided. For William, the move marked a defining chapter in his preparation for kingship. He had acted as a leader rather than a brother, choosing duty over reconciliation. And though his silence remained unbroken, those close to him described a man aware of the consequences. "He knows history will judge him," one confidant said, "but he's made peace with that. Every monarch must choose between what is right for the family and what is right for the crown. Rarely are they the same thing." That awareness carried a weight only those born to rule could understand. William's life had been a study in balance, balancing privacy with duty, emotion with restraint, humanity with symbolism. The decision to remove his nephew and niece's titles was an extension of that lifelong struggle. It was a choice made in service to an institution that demands constancy at all costs, even when constancy means sacrifice. Yet even as the heir solidified his place as a modern reformer, the emotional undercurrent of the act could not be ignored. The monarchy's story has always been one of human frailty wrapped in the trappings of ceremony. Its power lies not in perfection but in endurance, the ability to persist through the pain it inflicts on those within it. And in this moment, that endurance was once again being tested. Harry, too, found himself at a crossroads. The decision that had cost his children their titles forced him to reconsider the meaning of freedom. He had once envisioned a life outside royal constraint, a life where love and authenticity outweighed duty. But now, looking back, he recognized that true freedom is never without consequence. He had chosen independence, and independence had come with exile. Still, he would not trade it. "I left to protect my family," he once said in an interview, and for him, that truth remained unshaken. In their quiet California life, Harry and Meghan began to focus on what they could build rather than what they had lost. Their foundation expanded its outreach, their creative projects found new audiences, and their home became a sanctuary rather than a statement. They could not control the headlines, but they could shape the legacy they wanted to leave behind. Their children, growing up beneath California skies, would inherit not a crown, but an idea, the belief that love, compassion, and purpose define worth more than titles ever could. The world, in its ever-shifting attention, will move on. Yet this chapter will remain etched in royal history as one of reckoning and reflection. Future historians will analyze it as part of a continuum, a point along the line where monarchy met modernity, and where personal pain became public philosophy. They will note that in choosing principle over privilege, William strengthened the crown even as he fractured his family. They will write that Harry's exile became both a warning and a symbol, that freedom from tradition is not freedom from consequence. In Britain, the monarchy endures as it always has, quietly, majestically, unyielding. Its carriages still roll through London streets, its processions still draw crowds, its ceremonies still command awe. But beneath the pageantry lies a new awareness, that the people who inhabit the palace walls are not untouchable figures of myth, but human beings bound by choices as complex as any other families. The grandeur remains, but the illusion of perfection has faded. In its place stands something perhaps more real, fragile, flawed, but undeniably alive. As the story draws to its quiet close, the images remain vivid. The pen on the desk in Kensington Palace, the flash of cameras outside Buckingham's gates, the distant hum of voices debating the future of an ancient crown. The two brothers, once inseparable, now living in worlds that reflect the paths they chose. The children, innocent of the storm surrounding their names, laughing under Californian sunlight. History will judge each of them in its own way. Some will see William as a visionary, others as an enforcer. Some will view Harry and Meghan as victims of tradition, others as architects of their own exile. But judgment is the least important part of this story. What matters is the truth it reveals, that even the most powerful families are fragile, and even the oldest institutions must change to survive. In the end, it is not the loss of titles that defines the moment, but what those titles represent. The eternal tug-of-war between duty and love, past and future, identity and obligation. The monarchy will move forward, as it always has, adapting, reshaping, enduring. The world will keep watching, and the questions will linger long after the headlines fade. What does it mean to be royal in a world that no longer believes in royalty? What is the price of freedom when your name belongs to history? Perhaps the answer lies not in the palace, nor in the pages of royal decrees, but in the quiet places between them, in a father's determination, a brother's burden, a family's silence. The monarchy survives because it reflects us in all our contradictions. Our pride, our pain, our need to hold on to the past even as we walk into the future. As the final image fades, the palace bathed in twilight, its spires catching the dying light. One thought remains, steady and haunting. One signature, two children, and a legacy rewritten. The crown remains intact, but the family beneath it has been changed forever. And so the story ends where it began, with that single act, a stroke of a pen that redefined what it means to be royal and what it costs to remain human.